Morning arrived softly over Paris, as if the city itself wished to delay what everyone already knew would happen before sunset. The light crept through narrow streets and touched stone walls that had heard too many cries in recent years. In a small, bare room, Charlotte Corday sat on a simple wooden chair and listened to the distant sound of carts moving across the cobbles. The air smelled faintly of damp straw and old iron. Nothing in the room was meant to comfort her, yet nothing was meant to harm her either. It was a place of waiting, and waiting was its own quiet punishment. Charlotte Corday had been awake for hours. Sleep had come in short, broken moments, slipping away each time she closed her eyes. She did not tremble now. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, fingers lightly touching, as if she were waiting for someone to speak to her. Her breathing was slow and steady. Anyone watching might have thought she was calm by nature, but inside her thoughts moved like slow water, carrying memories she could not stop. She thought of the road that had brought her here. She thought of the small rooms she had once lived in, of voices that spoke with conviction and fear, of words that promised change but delivered blood. She remembered the moment that sealed her fate, though she did not dwell on it with regret. Regret would have been too easy, too human. Instead, she felt something quieter, a heavy understanding that once a choice is made, the world does not ask you to explain it. Outside, the city was awake. Vendors called softly to early customers. Somewhere, a bell rang, marking the passing of another hour. Paris continued to breathe and move, even as it prepared to watch another life end. Charlotte Corday understood this better than most. She had accepted long ago that her story would not stop the crowd from gathering or the blade from falling. A guard stood near the door. He was young, younger than he should have been for such work. His boots were worn, and his uniform hung loosely on his thin frame. He avoided looking at her, focusing instead on a spot on the wall. When he shifted his weight, the floor creaked, and the sound echoed in the small space. Charlotte Corday noticed this and almost smiled, not out of amusement, but out of recognition. He was nervous. Even now, after all he had seen, this day unsettled him. Time moved slowly. The air grew warmer as the sun climbed higher. Charlotte Corday was given a small piece of bread and water. She accepted them without comment, thanking the guard with a nod. Eating felt strange, as if the act belonged to someone else. Still, she ate, understanding that even in the face of death, the body insists on its habits. Her thoughts returned to the hours ahead. She knew she would not go directly from this room to the guillotine. There were steps in between, rituals that pretended to be orderly and just. She would be questioned again, examined, and prepared. Each step would strip away another layer of her former life, until only her name remained. The door opened, and another official entered, older and more practiced. His face showed no cruelty, only fatigue. He spoke her name, Charlotte Corday, as if reading it from a list, and asked her to stand. She did so smoothly, her movements unhurried. Chains were placed on her wrists, not roughly, but firmly. The metal was cold against her skin, a sharp reminder that her body was no longer her own. As she was led into a corridor, she noticed the way the light changed. The narrow window above cast long shadows that stretched across the floor like dark fingers. She walked between them, her footsteps soft. The sounds of the prison surrounded her now, doors opening and closing, distant voices, the shuffle of feet. Each sound felt amplified, as if the world wanted her to notice every detail before she left it. They brought her to another room, slightly larger, where a table stood with papers neatly arranged. A clerk waited there, quill in hand. This was the final confirmation, the moment where the state acknowledged her existence one last time. Questions were asked, answers recorded. Her voice remained steady. She did not raise it, did not let it fall. She spoke plainly, without defense or apology. When it was done, she was led away again. The corridor seemed longer now. The air felt heavier. Charlotte Corday felt a quiet sadness then, not for herself, but for the strange theater unfolding around her. So many people, so many rules, all focused on a single ending. It seemed excessive, almost fragile, as if the system needed these rituals to convince itself of its strength. Back in her waiting room, she was left alone. The door closed softly behind her. She sat again, the chair familiar now. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened to her own breathing. Calm did not mean peace, she knew. Calm was simply the space where fear had nothing left to say. She opened her eyes and looked at the wall across from her. The plaster was cracked, the lines forming shapes that her mind tried to follow. In another life, she might have traced them with her finger, wondering how they had formed. Now, she only observed them, letting her gaze rest. This was the last quiet she would know, and she allowed herself to feel it fully, without resistance, without illusion. The knock on the door came softly, almost politely. Charlotte Corday stood before she was asked to, sensing the moment had arrived for the next stage. 2 officials entered this time, their movements careful and deliberate. One carried a folded bundle of cloth. The other held a small leather case. Neither looked at her for long. It was easier, she suspected, to treat her as a task rather than a person. She was led to a preparation room where the light was stronger and less forgiving. Here, there were no shadows to soften the edges of things. A narrow table stood against one wall. A basin of water rested on a stool nearby. The air smelled faintly of soap and metal. Charlotte Corday understood what this room was for. Before the guillotine, the condemned were made presentable, as if appearance could bring dignity to the act. One of the officials spoke gently, explaining each step as though she were a guest rather than a prisoner. She listened without comment. Her chains were removed, replaced with a lighter restraint that allowed her hands to move. She was asked to remove her outer garments. The request was made without threat, but the meaning was clear. This was not about comfort. It was about control. Charlotte Corday complied slowly, folding each piece of clothing with care and placing it where she was told. The act felt strangely intimate, as if she were undressing for a final audience she could not see. Her skin felt the cool air of the room, and she shivered slightly, more from the moment than the temperature. The folded bundle of cloth was opened, revealing a plain white dress. It was simple, almost modest, meant to hide nothing and reveal nothing. She was instructed to put it on. As she did, she noticed how light it felt, how it seemed to weigh almost nothing in her hands. When she was dressed, one of the officials adjusted the fabric at her shoulders, careful not to touch her skin more than necessary. Next came her hair. Charlotte Corday had always worn it neatly, a habit from earlier years. Now, it was loosened and examined. The official explained that it would be cut. Not all of it, but enough to ensure the blade would fall cleanly. The explanation was practical, almost apologetic. A small pair of scissors was produced. She felt the gentle pull as sections of her hair were gathered. The sound of cutting was soft but final. Strands fell into a cloth on the floor, dark against the white fabric. This moment, more than any other, unsettled her. Hair was not just hair. It carried memory, time, identity. Watching it fall felt like watching pieces of herself being removed one by one. She kept her face still, her expression composed, but inside, something tightened. This was the horrifying part she had not anticipated, not pain, but the quiet stripping away of self. When it was finished, she was shown a small mirror. She did not ask for it, but it was offered as a matter of routine. Charlotte Corday looked at her reflection. The woman who stared back looked older, not in years, but in experience. Her eyes were steady, her mouth calm. She recognized herself, yet felt distant, as if she were already becoming a memory. The mirror was taken away. Her hands were bound again, gently but securely. The officials stepped back, giving her a moment. She did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The room seemed to hum with quiet tension, the kind that settles when everyone knows the end is near but refuses to acknowledge it aloud. As she was led from the room, she passed others in the corridor. Some looked away. Some stared openly. One woman, another prisoner perhaps, met her eyes briefly. In that glance, Charlotte Corday saw fear, curiosity, and something like respect. She wanted to say something kind, something that would ease the weight they both carried, but the moment passed too quickly. The path toward the exit grew louder. Sounds from the street filtered in, voices rising and falling like waves. The crowd was gathering. Charlotte Corday felt a shift inside herself, a turning point where private fear met public spectacle. What had been hers alone would soon belong to everyone. She paused briefly near the doorway that led outside. Sunlight spilled across the threshold, bright and indifferent. The air carried the smell of the city, sweat, dust, and anticipation. For a moment, she hesitated, not because she wished to turn back, but because she wanted to remember the feeling of standing still, untouched by the gaze of thousands. Then she stepped forward. The noise washed over her, loud and uneven. The cart waited, simple and exposed. She was helped onto it, her movements steady. The guards took their places. As the cart began to move, Charlotte Corday lifted her face to the sky. The clouds drifted slowly, unchanged by human drama. She breathed deeply, grounding herself in that small, ordinary act. The horrifying truth settled in then, not as terror, but as clarity. What they did before the guillotine was not about cruelty alone. It was about transforming a person into a symbol, polishing them for destruction. Charlotte Corday understood this fully now, and in that understanding, she found a quiet, defiant calm. The cart rolled through the streets at a measured pace, slow enough to let every eye follow. Charlotte Corday sat upright, her posture composed, her gaze forward. The noise of the crowd rose and fell around her, a mixture of shouts, murmurs, and uneasy silence. Some faces were animated with anger or excitement. Others looked uncertain, as if unsure what they were supposed to feel. She noticed small details as they passed. A child perched on a window ledge, gripping the stone tightly. An old man leaning on a cane, his expression distant. A woman clutching a basket, her knuckles white. These ordinary lives framed her final journey, reminding her that history was not made only by grand acts, but by countless quiet witnesses. The guards walked beside the cart, their eyes scanning the crowd. One of them glanced at Charlotte Corday briefly, then looked away. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A criminal. A woman. A problem already solved. She felt no anger toward him. Everyone here was playing a role assigned by forces larger than any single person. As they neared the square, the sound grew louder, more concentrated. The guillotine stood at the center, its shape unmistakable even from a distance. It was clean, well-maintained, almost respectful in its simplicity. Charlotte Corday felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with the weight of finality. There would be no more waiting after this. The cart stopped. She was helped down, her feet touching the ground firmly. The platform felt solid beneath her shoes. The officials moved with practiced efficiency, guiding her toward the steps. She climbed them without hesitation, her movements slow and deliberate. Each step felt like a farewell to something unseen. At the top, she was positioned carefully. The executioner approached, his expression professional, almost neutral. He spoke to her briefly, explaining what would happen, where she should stand, how she should move. The tone was not cruel, but it was detached, as if he were explaining a simple task. Charlotte Corday listened and nodded. Before the final moment, there was another ritual. Her hands were adjusted, her position corrected. The white dress was smoothed. These small acts felt intimate and unsettling, as if strangers were arranging her for a portrait she would never see. This was the horrifying preparation, the transformation of a living person into an object ready for display and destruction. She was asked if she had any final words. The question hung in the air, heavy and expectant. Charlotte Corday considered it carefully. Words had brought her here. Words had shaped the world that condemned her. She chose simplicity. Her voice carried clearly, not loud, but steady. She spoke of her conviction, not in anger, but in calm resolve. The crowd reacted unevenly. Some shouted. Some fell silent. The executioner moved again, guiding her toward the final position. As she lay down, she felt the cool wood beneath her, the pressure of hands ensuring she was placed correctly. The sky above her was a pale blue, almost gentle. She focused on that, on the way the light softened at the edges of her vision. In those final seconds, Charlotte Corday did not see her life flash before her eyes. Instead, she felt a deep, grounding awareness of being present. Every sensation was clear. The air on her skin. The sound of breathing. The distant call of a bird somewhere beyond the square. This clarity felt like a gift, unexpected and profound. The blade was raised. Time seemed to stretch, not dramatically, but quietly, like a held breath. Charlotte Corday remained still. Fear had no room left to grow. She had faced it already, in the rooms before, in the cutting of her hair, in the careful dressing, in the slow procession through the streets. What horrified her most, she realized, was not the end itself, but the way it had been prepared. The calm efficiency. The polite explanations. The transformation of death into a public routine. And yet, within that horror, she had found something steady, a sense of self that could not be stripped away by scissors or ceremony. As the final moment approached, she closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in focus. She held onto the quiet inside her, the place untouched by noise or judgment. Whatever happened next, that calm belonged to her alone. The square erupted after the blade fell, but Charlotte Corday was beyond the reach of sound. What remained was the echo of her presence, the impression she left on those who watched. Some turned away quickly, unable to bear it. Others stared longer, as if trying to understand what they had witnessed. The officials moved with practiced speed, completing the final steps of their duty. The body was removed. The platform was cleared. The guillotine stood ready, indifferent to what it had just done. Around it, the crowd began to disperse, the intensity draining away as reality returned. People spoke in low voices, arguing, reflecting, or saying nothing at all. In the days that followed, Charlotte Corday's name traveled quickly. It appeared in conversations, in whispers, in bold declarations. Some spoke of her as a monster. Others as a misguided soul. A few dared to see her as something more complex, a person shaped by her time and beliefs. The horrifying details of her final hours were repeated and reshaped, becoming stories told with varying degrees of truth and exaggeration. Yet what lingered most strongly was not the moment of death, but what came before. The way she was handled, prepared, and presented. The calm violence of procedure. For some, this raised uncomfortable questions. Was justice meant to be so tidy, so distant? Could a system that required such rituals truly claim moral clarity? Those who had been closest to her final moments remembered small things. The steadiness of her voice. The careful way she folded her clothes. The absence of panic in her eyes. These details stayed with them, resurfacing in quiet moments long after the crowd had moved on. History would later smooth her story into a simpler shape, easier to explain, easier to judge. But beneath that surface remained the human reality of her last day. A woman moving through a series of rooms. A body prepared for an end it did not choose. A mind navigating fear, resolve, and calm all at once. There was a strange kind of peace in the aftermath. The city returned to its routines. The square was cleaned. New conversations replaced old ones. Life, persistent and unyielding, continued. Yet something subtle had shifted. Those who witnessed her could not entirely forget the quiet dignity she carried through horror. Charlotte Corday did not live to see the impact of her actions, nor the debates they would inspire. But in her final hours, she had reclaimed something powerful. Even as control was taken from her, she chose how to move, how to speak, how to face the end. This choice, small and deeply personal, was her final act of defiance. The horrifying preparation before the guillotine had sought to turn her into an example, a warning. Instead, it revealed the fragility of systems built on fear. In stripping her down, they had exposed not weakness, but strength. Not chaos, but clarity. For those who reflect on her story now, the lesson is not found in the blade or the crowd, but in the quiet spaces in between. In the waiting room where she breathed calmly. In the preparation where she faced loss of identity. In the final moments where she chose presence over panic. The ending of Charlotte Corday's life was shaped by violence, but her response was shaped by intention. That contrast is what gives her story its lasting weight. It reminds us that even in the most controlled and horrifying circumstances, there remains a space where the human spirit can stand, unbroken and aware. And so her story ends not with noise, but with silence. A silence filled with meaning, with questions that do not fade easily. In that silence, Charlotte Corday remains, not as a symbol alone, but as a person who walked calmly into history and left behind a trace of quiet strength that time itself has not erased.